Alright, what's up guys? We have a new video today. I'm doing a brand new tier list. Today I'm going to be reviewing all of the decks that are in solo mode. Not only the decks in solo mode, but just how good they are in ranked. So whether any of these decks are actually worth fully building to play in ranked. So Konami gives you tons of different cards for each one of these decks. If you just complete the solo chapters, sometimes you will actually just get a straight up structure deck for completing the solo mode chapters. And in a lot of cases, you'll get a bunch of cards from the archetype that you can use to build the deck. And as you play it in solo mode, of course, you will learn how to play the deck. Now we're going to discuss today if any of these decks are actually worth playing in ranked. So let's get started. Right off the bat, we are going right here for Monarchs. Monarchs is kind of like it's the only issue with Monarchs. It's fully unlocked, which is really good. It's a tribute-based deck. If you played solo mode, you already know this. The only real issue with Monarchs is Monarchs are a little bit bricky, and the other thing with Monarchs is honestly, True Dracos are a better version of this deck. Like, this deck has cool tools like the Monarchs Erupt. It has cool tools like Stormforth, which allows you to tribute your opponent's monsters. Monarchs Erupts basically is like a one-sided skill drain. Both of those cards are really, really powerful. You also have Pantheism, which lets you draw, and during the same turn, you can banish Search. So you have some really, really strong cards in this deck. I'd say, like I said, the only issue with this deck is that it's very bricky, and it doesn't allow you to play the same level of floodgates that True Dracos does. Because True Dracos, you can play the skill drains, you can play the macrocosmos, you can play all that stuff because you can just tribute whatever's a problem. You can play things like Vanity's Emptiness. But this deck, on the other hand, it's like some of those really, really strong floodgates can actually hurt you. So honestly, I think Monarchs are probably in the effort platinum. So I didn't even explain these ranks. So S is going to be easy platinum. Like, if you build a deck that is in this tier, you can get to platinum fairly easily. Effort platinum, you really got to like kind of learn the deck. Save your gems. There's just better versions of decks out there, I'd say. And then F, of course, is just don't build the decks in F tier. All right, next we've got elementsabers. This is easily an F, stop before it's too late. This deck is like, it's a cool concept, don't get me wrong. I actually like playing it. I enjoyed the chapter in story mode, but this deck is like, it's like climbing up a waterfall. I mean, it's horrific. It's every time you do something good, there's like some sort of huge drawback to the deck. The deck basically puts a bunch of elemental lords on the field, and they all have pretty broken effects. But the problem is, if they leave the field, if those elemental lords leave the field, you have to skip your next battle phase. And it's kind of weird because it's like a deck that puts giant monsters on the board, and you're supposed to attack, but at the same time, the deck kind of like every single time you get any momentum going, you have to skip your next battle phase. The best card in the entire archetype is the field spell, because the field spell allows you to get around the restrictions of all of the main deck monsters, which the main deck monsters make you send from hand, but the field spell allows you to send from the deck. But if you use the search effect of the field spell, you skip your next battle phase. If an elemental lord leaves the field, you have to skip your next battle phase. Like, no matter what you do with this deck, you end up skipping your next battle phase. And it's almost like you create these unnecessarily long games where you have game on board. Like, you can win the match. You have over 8,000 damage, and you can't attack. You just have to keep passing. That's one of the real frustrating things about this deck. The other issue that I found with this deck is that sometimes it can be a little bit too slow to set up, and it doesn't really have a great turn one board. Like, most of the time, you'll just summon this guy. This is their like main boss monster. It's their strongest non-elemental lord monster. You summon it by sending 2 elemental lords from your hand. And the issue with this card is, like, yeah, you summon him, you have to go minus on summoning him if you don't have the field spell. And then that's just kind of about it. Like, the deck doesn't have a great going first board. It's really, really weak against floodgates. Honestly, this deck it's very difficult to get to platinum playing an elementsaber deck. Honestly, though, if you want to challenge yourself, go ahead. It's like I said, I don't recommend it though. This is Demise. Demise is a going second ritual deck. So I would say I would say it's probably pretty good in it's probably in Savior Gems. There are definitely better ritual decks than Demise. It's not a bad deck by any means. Like, it's a decent ritual deck. It has a monster. The queen lets you attack twice. The king, if you use the little king, he blows up the board at the cost of 2,000 life points, not once per turn. The big king blows up the board. Like, it's a going second ritual deck. There are obviously built-in issues with playing a going second ritual deck because ritual summoning requires so many resources, and if your opponent just, again, if they just have floodgates, which this game is full of floodgates, if they have floodgates, that can really prevent you from doing anything you actually want with this deck, especially if they flip like an Imperial Order or an anti-spell, or they're playing a deck full of judgments and strikes. It can really put a hindrance on your deck when you're relying on spells and you have to go so minus to actually OTK your opponent. I'd say probably Savior Gems is the best area for this deck. Next is Megalith. Megalith is a complicated one because it's a ritual engine more than it is a pure deck. I wouldn't recommend building a pure Megalith deck for ranked. It's always been used as an engine. It's either an engine for some kind of FTK, it's an engine for a block dragon deck, it's always some kind of engine for some other deck, or it's just a straight up ritual engine. It's not usually played on its own. The only problem with Megalith is every few years Konami tries to revamp rituals and make them as strong as possible. A few years ago it was incantations, then it was megaliths, and now the most recent one is Drytrons. Drytron is the best ritual engine that we have. I would recommend, definitely, if you're doing any ritual engine, it's going to be Drytron. It's just better. This is basically like a tier 2 ritual engine. Incantations are a tier 3 ritual engine. This is better than incantations, but I don't think this is better than Drytron. Yeah, Savior Gems, just play Drytron. There are just better options than this. Alright, next is Gem Knights. Gem Knights is actually kind of underrated. You'd actually be shocked at how good this deck can actually be. I'd probably say it's probably an effort platinum. Like, you have to actually try, know how to play the deck, but you definitely get the platinum with Gem Knights. Yeah, this deck is actually kind of good. Something that you have to keep in mind is that Block Dragon is at 3. Union Carrier is at 3. You have access to all of the Adamanticators. The Gem Knight engine mixed with some of those more broken rock engines is actually really strong. You don't have to play like a full FTK version of the deck. Like, screw the FTK. The regular old Gem Knight deck is actually kind of nice. You have access to some good fusions. Definitely more of a going second OTK sort of style, but Gem Knights is definitely a very underrated deck. Alright, next is Gladiator Beast. This is another one that might actually shock you. I'd say it's somewhere in between. I don't think it's an easy platinum by any means. I think it's somewhere in the effort platinum. This deck is actually really good. You can actually mix this with Tri-Brigades, and Tri-Brigades are already really strong. Now, you have to bear in mind, this is not a traditional Gladiator Beast. You are not playing Gladiator Beast the way you played Gladiator Beast in 2008. That ship has sailed. It's gone. That whole, like, changing monsters at the end of battle phase, that part of Gladiator Beast is absolutely gone. The new Gladiator Beast combos are all about summoning the fusion monster that summons other Gladiator Beasts. That is the entire Gladiator Beast combo. You can end on like an Appaloosa and another negate. It can end on 3-4 negates, and if you include the Tri-Brigades, it can end on even more negates. If you include the Zodiacs, you can end on a Zeus. This deck is very strong depending on what build you're going to mix it with. But again, this is not the typical Gladiator Beast style that used to exist back in the day. That is completely gone now. You are relying on a lot of the new Gladiator Beast cards that have recently come out. They've gotten some really strong support. They've got a fusion monster that cheats out other fusion monster. You've got a built-in archetype monster reborn that also summons from the hand and protects the monster. I mean, it's crazy. There's some really strong cards in this archetype. And the starter deck, the cards that they give you in the starter deck, I'm sorry, the structure deck, are actually kind of decent. So I'd say probably a platinum. If you're a more advanced player, you could probably put that into easy platinum. Next is Karakuri. This is probably like a Savior Gem C, somewhere around here. I think it's probably better than this deck, than the Demise deck. This is a synchro deck, but it does have access to some cool like lines of play. It can go into the Galaxy Tomahawk, which is a banned card in the TCG. In addition to that, it has level 9s built into the deck, so it can go into a True King of All Calamities very, very easily. If the deck starts going off, True King of All Calamities basically like a guaranteed thing every single turn. Now, the only issue with this is, like, I'll just be honest with you, they're straight up just better. There are just way better synchro decks available to you. You really don't need to play this. Definitely, there's just any other synchro deck is a lot better than this deck. It's very fragile, but other than that, I think it's a half decent deck. Sharon Nui, this deck I think is pretty much easy platinum. The structure deck that they give you has multiple super rares that are very good. They have like Sharon Nui Solitaires in there. You have Sharon Nui Swallow Slash, which is in there. You have quite a few good Sharon Nui cards. It's a very, very good start to a zombie world deck. Of course, you do have to invest and then get all of the other zombie cards needed to actually play it, like Unizombie, stuff like that. But that deck is very, very strong in this game. You just basically summon you just basically end on a zombie world with a Doom King Baller Drock, and then you just end on a number of floodgates, because the floodgates are really, really strong in this game. So you can end on a Rivalry of the Warlords, and you're basically set. Yeah, the deck is really, really strong. More than easily can get to platinum. It can also combo off. None of the combo combos are actually hit in this particular version. So you've got things like Jet Synchron available to you. This deck is very, very strong. You just have to invest in the Zombie World package, but it's pretty much an easy platinum. All right, next up is Geargia. Geargia is another stop before it's too late. This deck is actually kind of fun in the solo mode, but I would not recommend fully building this deck and going into ranked. It is a very, very dated and slow deck. It is an extremely slow XYZ engine. There are just straight up better decks than this. There are way better XYZ engines. You have things like Zodiacs, which can like one card Zeus every single time. For this card to make a Zeus, it requires like 3 monsters. It's embarrassing. Yeah, I would say leave this deck alone. It's a really, really cool chapter in the solo mode, but again, do not take this deck into ranked. It's going to end in disaster. Definitely don't invest in any of the ultra rares. If you are convinced and you want to make it, I'd say probably mix it with Ancient Gears, but generally speaking, I would say probably stay away from this deck. Next is Digital Bugs. This is another XYZ archetype. This is another one that's stop before it's too late. Honestly, I think this is a pretty cool archetype. Like, personally, I like it. Don't get me wrong, but it's not good for modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It is very, very slow. It is very, very weak. And honestly, there's a better insect deck coming around the corner any minute now. Bee Troopers and Battle Wasps. It's a deck that's coming out, like, I don't know when it's coming out, but it's definitely going to be the better insect deck. If you are really skilled, you could probably get it up to here, but I would say this is another deck you just stay away from. There are just so many better XYZ decks. There's no need to invest in all of the URs needed to build this deck. It's going to be very difficult to get to Platinum 1 with this particular deck. Next is qliphorts. Qliphorts is probably somewhere up here in the Effort Platinum. This is definitely a very good deck with all of the floodgates available to you. Skill Drain is a 3, which if any of you have actually, like, if any of you are long-term players, you know the reason that Skill Drain went to 1 in the first place was because of qliphorts. Qliphorts with Skill Drain is disgusting because all of their monster effects are negated and they actually gate attack. And then on top of that, you have stuff like you can flip stuff like Vanity's Ruler, Macrocosmos. None of that stuff hurts your deck. The deck, everything is at 3. It's fully unlocked. It's an extremely consistent deck. It's very, very annoying. It has access to a ton of floodgates. Definitely a very, very strong deck. Next is Dino Mist. Honestly, this is another kind of like a platinum, Effort Platinum. It's a very strong pendulum deck. It's probably on a similar tier to qliphorts. So what's cool is Electromite is available in this game, and this deck has a lot of cool lines of play. Like, for example, this deck can actually end on a Cyber Dragon Infinity. This deck can actually do quite a bit. It can end on Cyber Dragon Infinity. It can end on a Dagda, and then you can use that. You can activate that Dagda, make your opponent shuffle away their hand, and then draw a new hand, and then you can draw and Lockbird them. there's a lot of really cool lines of play. Or I'm sorry, you can actually make your opponent shuffle away their hand, then chain Droll and Lockbird, and then they won't draw anything. So yeah, there's a lot of really cool lines of play with this. You can actually search the Droll and Lockbird because it's a pendulum deck with there's the magical abductor, I think. Also, this archetype has one of like really strong trap card called Dino Mist Howling. It's one of like the best trap cards in any of the pendulum decks. Basically, Dino Mist Howling allows you to fill your scales with Dino Mist monsters on activation, and then you can tribute a Dino Mist monster and bounce a card your opponent controls. Like the effects of this card are really strong. And just generally, this deck is actually pretty good. Honestly, I could see myself getting to platinum fairly easily by completing this deck. Yeah, definitely I'd say a platinum effort. Next, we've got, this is the first chapter of the World Legacy. So they've got 2 chapters. I'm going to count one of them as World Chalice, the deck. The other one I'm going to count as Mecha Knights. So they actually award you with a variety of cards from a variety of different archetypes in these. But like I said, I'm gonna count these as the ones I said. So next we've got World Chalice. World Chalice is probably a Savior Gems deck. It is a very fragile combo deck. It is like a very high skill deck. I'll give it that. It's a very high skill deck. It's a very high skill ceiling to learn how to play. You definitely can get to platinum with it, but it's going to take you some serious effort. The games are going to be extremely long, and that's if you win. Like I said, this deck, it takes a lot of skill, very large learning curve, and on top of all of the skill and all the learning curve, it is, like I said, very fragile. It loses to a bad Ash. It loses to a bad Effect Veiler. It loses to like simple hand traps. If you get Max Seed, you basically have to scoop. Yeah, this deck is probably in the C Savior Gems area. Very fragile. Also, the other issue with World Chalice is you have to remember Ib, the World Chalice Justicar, is one of their main playmakers, and it's still banned. Despite it being the OCG list, it's still banned. So like that's one of the best decks, one of the best cards to ever come out for the archetype, and it's still not available, which sucks for the deck, but I mean, what can you do? So I'd say probably in the Savior Gems area. This I'm going to count as Mecha Knights. Mecha Knights is definitely easy platinum. There are so many. Most people in Master Duel, when they win that dice roll, or they win not the dice roll, when they win rock, paper, scissors, or the coin flip, they always choose to go first. So if you have a deck that is built to go second, you automatically have an advantage. This game gives you a free Lightning Storm and a free Raigeki. So right off the bat, you just have so many tools. You draft a couple Raigeki, you draft a few more Lightning Storms, Harpy's Feather Duster, and you basically just play the Mecha Knights. You can play through any negate you want, even if your opponent makes a huge board. Even if your opponent has skill drain, none of that matters. Like, this deck is so strong if you fully complete it. I actually think that Mecha Knights is probably the best deck out of all of the solo mode decks, because it is extremely good for platinum. It's extremely good for ranked, because like I said, you can just basically play through any board. Even if your opponent has like serious floodgates like Macrocosmos, it doesn't even matter, because this deck doesn't care. Not only does it not matter if your monsters are banished, your monsters banish themselves anyway. That's a part of their effects. They banish themselves for cost, so they play around skill drain, they play around everything. This is a very strong, very resilient deck. Probably the best deck out of all of the solo mode decks to actually invest some gems into and actually complete. But that is it. That is all of the solo mode decks that are available so far. If you enjoyed this video, definitely leave a like and subscribe. I am trying to grow. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.